right? Thanking and praising God for the way that he uniquely sees each of us. Let's call Matthew chapter 9 each. Understanding that in this chapter, it is going to seem that he is going to deal with each uniquely according to their ways, whether it is a group or an individual that he comes in contact with here in chapter 9, a chapter that is going to begin and end with interactions that are going to provoke unique responses from either the scribes or the Pharisees, reactions that are going to give us an indication, as we might have mentioned in the last chapter, of the friction that he is going to have with them going forward. But in the meantime, it's going to seem that as he is going on about his business, he is simply being kind and helping to enlighten people about why he's doing some of the things that he's doing as he goes about his days. Similar to what he is going to say to the apostles after the resurrection here in Matthew 20, here in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 28, where he gives the Great Commission, telling them, as you are going, he's going to tell them to make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to observe all the things that he has commanded them. He's going to seem to live out that example here in Matthew chapter 9, which, as we might have mentioned, is going to begin with a healing, a relatively famous healing of a paralytic in verses 1 through 8, as verse 9 is going to show that as he is going on about his business, he's going to call Matthew. And while he is sitting with Matthew, it's going to attract a good number of tax collectors and sinners, which is going to attract the ire or the disapproval of the Pharisees. Going on in verses 14 through 17, it's going to talk about he's not only getting opposition that seems to be a little bit snarly, I don't even know if that's a word, but a little bit hostile. He's just going to get questions from those who just kind of are scratching their heads about what he's doing. And those are going to be this time in the forms of, that is going to be this time in the form of questions from John's disciples. Going on, though, in verses 18 through 26, it's going to talk about a famous healing of the daughter of a ruler. And as he is agreeing to go and heal the daughter who has actually died, there's a woman who is simply going to believe that if she can simply touch the hem of his garment, she will be healed. In fact, she is, making the famous story of the woman who touched the hem of his garment. Low key, one of the things I noticed, I think the last time I went through Matthew's gospel, is it seems that she might have been an example for others in less famous passages, because he's going to visit a town in which people in that same pattern are going to believe that as long as they can simply touch the hem of his garment, they will be healed. And in fact, they are. However, going on in this chapter, he is going to make it to the house of that ruler and heal his daughter, but not before being laughed at by the crowd assembled there when he tells them that she is simply sleeping. They laugh, but he heals, and they stop laughing. They seem to, at least partially, or at least some of them, begin to believe. As the chapter is going to go on in verses 27 through 31, too, in what seems to be a more private setting, heal 2 blind men, understanding that a lot of the healings in this chapter, or a lot of the events in this chapter, are going on around crowds as his fame begins to spread. And taking advantage of the privacy at this point, he's going to encourage them. 2 men who have been healed, or by the time they've been healed according to their faith, he's going to encourage them to make sure that no one knows about it. They're going to talk about it anyway, and his fame is going to spread, leading to the last healing in this chapter, the one that seems to bring the resentment of the Pharisees, one that I'll just read in verses 32 through 34. As they were going away, behold, a demon-possessed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he casts out demons by the prince of demons. Seemingly undeterred, the chapter will conclude with verses 35 through 38, describing the way in which he goes throughout all the cities and villages in a familiar pattern, teaching and proclaiming and healing every disease and affliction. Most notably in verse 36, or at least most notably for me, describing the way in which, as he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, concluding with a prayer, noting to his disciples that the harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few, asking them or telling them to pray for God to send out laborers to the harvest. fit transition to the next chapter, in which he is going to do exactly that. He is going to equip at least 12 of them, 12 of his disciples, to go forward, instructing them about the things that they are to do and the responses they can likewise expect. Understanding that if they have harassed their Christ, they are probably going to harass them as well. Understanding that, though, in this chapter, as we mentioned, the thing that caught my attention is the way in which he treats each according to their ways, whether or not it is the scribes who, in response to the healing of the paralytic, they're going to have questions, but they're not going to be outwardly disrespectful. He is simply going to see through to what's going on in their minds, and he is going to call it out as being evil, but he doesn't seem like he's going to condemn them, even though he's going to tell them, you're meditating on an evil thought right now. You might want to deal with that. My ad lib. But going on from there, as he sees Matthew, a tax collector, he is going to bring him in a way that is going to seem to extend an invitation beyond Matthew to others like him, which is going to draw the ire of the Pharisees, who are going to assign ill motives or seemingly ill motives to the question the question they're going to raise to his disciples. Why is he with those people? At which point he is going to teach them according to their faulty suspicion that his mission really is to call in people who are willing to listen, even if they are faulty right now. Going on, though, in verses 14 through, 17, when he's questioned by John's disciples, he does not assign ill motives to their question, but understanding all the work that John has done and the fact that their questions might not come from an ill place, he simply answers their question, each according to their ways, as his interaction with the ruler is a lot less hostile, because they're simply respectfully asking him to come heal the man's daughter, who seems to have already passed on and on the way, each according to their ways. There's a woman who doesn't even need to get his attention because she believes that she can be healed simply by touching the heel of his garments. According to her ways, she is actually healed. Those who laugh at him, he does not seem to rebuke in the same way he rebukes the Pharisees, who seem to be settling into more evil motives, but he just goes on about his business, and his actions seem to be persuasive. He didn't have to worry about being laughed at because he knows his gifts are just going to persuade some. And that seems to be the according to their ways in that crowd, as he will go on to the two blind men who, according to their faith, are healed, setting up an interesting contrast with the Pharisees in the final, healing, for lack of a better term, of the demon-oppressed man who was mute. Understanding that the difference between the rebuke he offers to the scribes at the beginning of the chapter and the rebuke he offers to the Pharisees, or the rebuke that the Pharisees probably had earned by the end of the chapter, is the scribes are simply internally raising questions. And so he is possibly because they were at least respectful enough to keep it to themselves, he is rebuking them directly, but maybe a little more gently. This chapter is going to mark the progression towards a very sharp rebuke in chapter 12, where a similar accusation from a group of Pharisees is going to provoke him to tell them about the unforgivable sin. Understanding that the distinction between the ways of the scribes in this chapter, between the scribes in this chapter and the ways of the Pharisees in this chapter seems to be that of the humility to at least question, gets a little bit more mercy than those who are already warming up to the temptation to simply accuse falsely. Understanding that in the last chapter, we talked about this growing division within Israel, caused in a lot of ways by Jesus' presence as he's going on about his business. Some who see the glass as half full come to him for healing, and according to their ways, they get healed. Others, seeing the glass as half empty, we're seeing they are not just questioning as the scribes, they are looking for the worst possible interpretation of what Christ is doing. And in looking for the worst in what he is doing, they are actually exposing some of the worst that might be available to expose in themselves. Moreover, by allowing that to spill over into a condemnation of what he is doing, by the time we get to chapter 12, we're going to see that they may actually be condemning themselves.